Hey everybody, Coach Ed Meidson here. I'm going to give a little bit of an intro to periodization. For some of you, I know this will not be a new idea. However, we do have some new coaches, but also it's always good to give a quick refresher to some ideas that maybe not be 100% familiar with us. So, what is periodization? So, periodization is a concept of systematic progression, that is, training programs that follow predictable patterns of change in training variables. Specifically for us, this is going to be connecting player training load to player performance in a smaller window. So, we're looking at like weekly schedules or day to day schedules. So, how does periodization fit into the overall development big picture? Obviously, we have the annual year where we talk about the developmental plan relative to the player's actual age. We have the seasons, which may be fall, winter, spring, summer. We have the 52 weeks in the individual season, or the however we break it up into the thirds of the fourths, and then the training session in each of those seasons. So we're going to be looking more at the training weeks in those seasons. So periodization, first and foremost, is a look at players' response to training and or games. So for thinking about periodization, we first have to look at player performance, or their performance level. If we're looking at the player in the now, where are they at today? They have a specific capacity for performing. So this will be their starting performance. So performance level. So let's call this 0. So if we're looking at a scale, we have 0 is their starting point. 1, 2, or 3 would be improvement, and -1, -2, and -3 would be regression or fatigue. And then as we move on from their starting point, we're looking about how the player responds to a single session or multiple sessions over the week, over that time period. So if we're looking at the dots along the timeline, that's the player's adjustment or reaction over time. So first we're going to look at how a player may react to a single session or game. What is the player's short-term response? So we're looking at the initial maybe 24 to 48 hours after a training session or game. Obviously, what is the player's short-term response? They're tired, right? They're going to be fatigued. If they played 60 minutes in a game or had a really intense 75-minute training session, they're going to be tired the next day. This will cause a decrease in their ability to perform. If you have a heavy session or a heavy game the very next day, that player will not be able to perform at the same level. Now, as we look further out from immediately after that training session or game, so after that drop in potential performance, it will come back up. The player will respond or adapt to that training or game they experienced. That return to their baseline or 0 is what we call the recovery. So after every training session or every game, there will be a recovery period for each player. After we have that recovery period, so after we get back to baseline, due to that experience of the training or game, the player will increase their potential for performance. So this is their new performance level. So after we have the trough, we have recovery, and then we find our new 0. So after the recovery period, We're going to come above our baseline and have a new standard for what we're ready for. So where we are at in the now. This is what we call adaptation. So they've adapted to the new training environment or the new stress from the game. Now we have a new zero. Now this process of dropped performance to increased performance is based on the level of stress from each session or each game. The bigger the stress, the bigger the dip or trough and drop in their performance over time, now there is some positive to higher stress training or games, right? The bigger the drop, so the bigger the stress, the bigger potential for the new performance level. The negative of a higher stress game or a higher stress training or higher level of intensity is it does take more time for that player to recover to find that higher level of performance. This short-term process is extremely important in the foundation of training methodologies, right? So when we're planning our week and we think about how we're planning our training session, we have to think about the workload that our players are engaged in on the day-to-day to determine how we plan that week. Each moment in time on our timeline is a given amount of energy that the player has to expend. So we can look at this as player readiness, right? The player readiness should determine what we can do on each training session. So, for example, we had a game on a Sunday and we're looking at a training session on Monday, and we're about 20 to 24 hours out from that high intensity game. Our readiness is going to be very low. We don't necessarily want to introduce new ideas or have a high intensity training session immediately after that game. Now, you might be asking yourself, why does that player readiness matter? Lower player readiness affects multiple things. Decisions will be of a lower quality. The number of actions the player can actually perform in that time period is going to be lower. And because of those two items, that diminishes their ability to learn. The converse of that, the higher the player readiness, the greater ability to train. Decisions are going to be better. The number of actions that they can complete in that time frame are going to be higher, and their ability to learn is thus increased. So if we look at this from the standpoint, if we fail to understand training demand with player readiness, what can this look like? It's going to look like performance in games are worse. The potential for injury will increase. The development trajectory will decrease on a continuous basis. When we look at the graph and we look at the dips from the stress, if we don't allow that recovery period, it continues to dip, dip, dip. Best case scenario, if we do that, we have slowed the development of the player. If we're in the middle, not great, not worse in this potential, the player's development may stagnate for a window of time, either due to burnout or injury. So what I think about in those areas is when we might have 2 or 3 training week and 2 or 3 games, and it just seems like they're not getting anything. They don't understand any new ideas. They're not improving. We probably see that middle ground a lot. Now, worst case scenario, players are going to have to leave the game for a season due to injury or burnout from overtraining. Now, if we get it right, what does that look like? We're going to increase the player performance trajectory in the short term. So just like where if we overwork them and the trough continues to drop, if we repetitively train them at their peak or the new zero, we will grow the potential for their understanding, learning, and performance. We will also increase the player's injury resistance, and we will maximize the player's development over long term. Basically, by managing the micro windows weekly, we can reach all our development goals over the year. So just as an example, how might we apply this to a week? So in this example, we have a 3 training session week and a 2 game week. So we come to a Sunday, we have a game. On that next Monday, we wouldn't want to be doing a heavy training session or introducing ideas. That's going to be a light training and or recovery session. Then we come to the Tuesday. Again, we're a back-to-back-to-back, maybe slightly more intense training session, maybe some technical, reviewing some ideas we've already introduced. But again, maybe not introducing new ideas or not too heavy. We get the Wednesday break. We come to the Thursday session. We can do a high-intensity training session, introduce new ideas, a heavier load to, as we've allowed the recovery period to hit and we're at the new performance level, we can go hard on Thursday. Again, break on Friday, and now hopefully we can be at our peak performance for that Saturday game. If you would like to look at some additional resources about periodization, there is Periodization Training, Theory and Methodology of Training by Human Kinetics. That's more of a textbook style book that's used in the classroom setting. For more of a reading type book, you can do Player Development, The Holistic Method by J. Cohn and G. Smith. Both good resources that I would highly recommend. If you have additional questions after watching this and want to reach out directly, feel free to shoot me an email at the email that I shared the link from, but that's emeitzen@sportingnebraskafc.com. Thanks all. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if you have any questions.